Charlie Kennedy. He's one of my favorite sales leaders across the pond. He's authentic, he's transparent, and he's always all in. In this episode, Charlie talks about the three essential elements needed to build and thrive in a decentralized command structure: resourcefulness, tapping into your natural curiosity; resilience, you're working in the arena of rejection; and empowerment. It provides better employee engagement, and you got to move fast. Take a listen, hit the like button, leave a comment, and consider sharing with someone who'll appreciate it. Oh yeah, hit the subscribe button too, so you're in the loop as new episodes are dropped. See you out there. Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Bonelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. The currency of leadership is transparency. You've got to be truthful. I don't think you should be vulnerable every day, but there are moments when you've got to share your soul and conscience with people and show them who you are and not be afraid of it. Howard Schultz. And today's guest has built up a lot of currency with those who've worked with him and for him over the years because of his transparent and authentic leadership style. Zooming in from across the pond in the UK, Charlie Kennedy, welcome to Coach2Scale.
Thank you very much, Matt. And I'm very happy to be here and really looking forward to the next kind of 45 minutes or so. It's going to be fun.
It always is. I always have enjoyed our conversations, and we're just publishing this one live, I guess, Charlie. So just edit it for those at home. But but just other than that, we're having a good conversation. So Charlie, listen, let me ask you this question right off the top. There's a lot of myths in our crazy business. What's a myth that has persisted in sales and when it comes to coaching salespeople, leading salespeople, and sales managers? A myth that you believe is either misguided or maybe even complete BS?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think one that kind of continues to certainly exist beyond sales is this idea of the kind of account executive who's this kind of lone wolf, solo hunter who will get the deal at any cost. And, while we certainly have those good behaviors, I think that the point is that it often sort of the pejorative sense suggests that they're not team players, and they're just out there solely focused on getting the kind of deal. But I think what I've seen certainly over the last, 5, 6, 7 years is that sales is very much a team sport, where you have to bring multiple teams and departments together, particularly on the larger enterprise deals. So I think that's one that kind of continues, particularly, as I said, for people beyond the immediate sales department. And while those kind of lone hunter, slightly ruthless elements help in sales and the persistence, the fact is that generally people are a lot more intelligent to understand that the collaboration, it takes a village to close a deal is really important.
And just maybe anecdotally, do you sense that there's a connection with the people that are more collaborative, that get more people involved in the deals, that leads to larger deals, that leads to happier clients? I mean, what's the downstream effect on that collaboration?
I think generally it does end up in significantly larger deal sizes. And I think the teams and departments that are necessary beyond the immediate deal are also made aware ahead of time of what's coming down and are able to react to this. And this could be product features, that may not currently exist or be needed, or current features that might be seen as kind of not quite up to scratch for what the customer wants. And there's an opportunity to discuss that, the pros and cons. But, to answer your question, without a doubt, it brings, to life the importance of sales and the complexity of it. And I think, it just shows to the customer directly, particularly when you start bringing other people onto calls as the process goes through, that you're serious about their business, solving their business pain. And this is essentially the kind of front bench, when they do sign and start working with you, that you're going to get. And I think that adds credibility, but also I think makes the client more comfortable that actually they're going to get value for money at the end.
And sometimes that's a challenge, right? That, not being the lone wolf, not being that person. I think sometimes some salespeople are reluctant to bring other people in because, they have the relationship with the prospect or the client, and, they may not want to mess up the relationship. But they also don't want to confuse the client. So it seems like it takes the right type of person to coordinate all of those resources within the company and bring those resources to bear with the clients. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I mean, and you're absolutely right. You and I have often joked over the years, what we call the deal prevention team, as you start bringing other teams and departments in and they just slow things down. The reality is often, you need those teams involved, whether it be finance, legal, because there's a lot of aspects that need to be thought through. And if you're getting ahead of problems, you're actually speeding up the process. So then it really comes down to an element of control. But good salespeople will make sure that they actually coordinate internally the resources, make sure that the roles and responsibilities are clearly laid out. So by the time it actually gets to any kind of customer facing call or even internal facing calls, people know what the deal is. And the fact is that that salesperson, as kind of chief ringmaster, is very much in charge of the process. So it's very much up to the salesperson to actually lead that and coordinate it. Rather than actually kind of other teams getting in and being difficult. But, sometimes legal will always have a very good perspective of stuff that may later snowball into a big problem, which could slow things down by a matter of weeks or months, which of course then has knock-on effects with your forecasting, and exec eyes. So the question is it's about mitigating risk, understanding roles and responsibilities in order to actually progress the deal, which feeds back to our earlier point. Deals these days are longer and more complex, I think, than they've ever been. So you really need to have all your wits about you and understand what you need to do personally, but from a broader perspective.
Yeah. Chief ringmaster. I love that. Wrote that down. Love the analogy. And so when you think about how you've built and led teams over the past bunch of years, is that codified into a Charlie's leadership playbook? If so, what are some of the key elements that you've codified within your playbook leading teams?
I think, the three elements I kind of like in a team, which is, the first one is resourcefulness. And we'll loop back to these. So resourcefulness, I think, is absolutely key for anyone in sales. Resilience is another one. It's a tough job. And the other one is, I think, empowerment. So those are what I call the kind of three tenets of what I believe actually makes a good sales leader, but also a good account executive, account manager, and all those elements. So to loop back to that, what do we mean by kind of resourcefulness? I would say it's about having a natural curiosity. What we do, depending, whether you're verticalized or not, the companies we deal with are hugely complex. They have, very many different departments and you're trying to solve different pains. So actually, when you're talking to a customer, you really need to do your groundwork. And that's ahead of the very first call. Or even when you're planning the prospecting with your BDR, or if you are a BDR, you really need to understand today in this kind of very frenetic, busy market, how you're going to get cut through. And that comes back to the training we've done with you over the years, which is about solving business pain. But in order to actually get that clarified and in a real position, you actually need to understand their company. And that's been resourceful. So it's doing research, using previous experience. And I think making sure that by the time you get to that first customer call, that you come across as credible, knowledgeable, and capable. So those are the elements, I think, that make up the element of being kind of resourceful in terms of understanding the market, understanding the customer, understanding the individual, doing your homework, educating yourself. So actually, you can actually then bring the resolution via your technology, and potentially services if you have them, to make sure that actually you're speaking their language and you instantly get that traction and build that rapport.
And when you think about Charlie, when you think about resourcefulness, you gave a lot of different points to support that. Is there an example that comes to mind, in terms of that? That's almost like the key, ideal definition of resourcefulness? And I don't mean definition, I mean like an example. If someone's listening, what's an example of somebody being resourceful, like in action?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly when I started, I was an individual contributor as well. And I found my job really fascinating because one week I could be going to see a kind of utility company, like a water company. 4 days later, going to see a government entity such as the Ministry of Defence or Downing Street. And then the week after, going to the Weetabix factory. I mean, that actually happens. So you're seeing lots of different companies, but of course, in the meantime, you're having to sort of get your ducks in a row to understand what you're going to say to these people. And you could argue that, it's hard to be knowledgeable in all those sectors, but it's not. It's basically, I would say, it's a case of, doing your groundwork. So for the water company, for example, am I an expert on utilities? But the way I always looked at it was to do lots of internet research, and actually there's an awful lot of kind of free stuff online that if you put in like the future of utilities and water, in UK or Europe or US, a lot of the companies such as kind of, Accenture, PwC, McKinsey have actually done 4-page kind of reports, and this gives you a huge amount of information to understand the complexities, but also what their challenges are in the future. So literally within kind of 5-10 minutes, you can become an expert on that sector. So that's going to start to kind of formulate. Now you've got to kind of marry that to your original brief, to then the kind of initial presentation and the demo. So you can start to weigh all those things in together. And from that, I think then you start to become, the package that you put together at the end is going to be far better in terms of what you present to the customer.
Yeah. And it doesn't take a lot. You don't have to be an expert, but it doesn't take a lot to be able to prepare and ask thought-provoking, intelligent questions. And just to show the customer, show them them, right? Show them that you took the time to do so. And all of a sudden that currency builds up and that trust starts to build as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it comes down to that element of being curious, and also that just solving the business pain. And I think that one of my favorite elements that you taught us was like, often the problem they bring you isn't necessarily the problem they're trying to solve, which is why, with the Simon Sinek always asked why 5 times. So it all kind of builds into this kind of cycle where you understand their business, you're trying to solve their pain, you're starting to sort of peel back the onion to really understand what it is. I think that's when you really start to build the rapport, the trust, and the deal starts to kind of actually formulate itself and build velocity, because you go from being a salesperson to a consultant. And really that's what we all want when it comes down to it, is to be seen as a consultant and a partner who's going to come in and solve what their current existing problem is, or a broad range of problems.
I think I listened to too many Simon Sinek podcasts in front of my son when he was young, because he took that 5 why literally. And Dad, why? Every time I see this Simon Sinek start with why, I think of my son sitting in the car seat, 20 years ago, asking why like 50 times. So Charlie, you talked about, you said the 3 were resourcefulness, resilience, and empowerment. You explained resourcefulness. What's resilience in your world?
Resilience is, I think, it's to do with a mixture of things. It's about, the sales job is tough. Even if you look at your average SaaS conversion rates, which could be as low as 10-15%, but even successful companies, with a solid enterprise engine are probably looking at 35-40 if you're lucky. That means that you're having a lot of rejection all the time. So there's an element of the kind of self-belief to take that rejection, use it in a positive way, in where you felt flat or short, to make sure you get that feedback and to actually self-improve yourself. But just have the kind of the resilience to carry on. It's about having a bit of grit, and I think that's it on the sales process, but also the fact is that, there's a lot of internal pressures, in terms of forecasting, all of that element, and immediate fire drills that we all know exist. We wish they didn't, but, often something comes down from the executive or the investors where you're going to have to drop everything and doing it. But this means you have to be juggling the whole time. And I think that kind of resilience is important. It's the ability to sort of say, cope in the moment, not only with a deal, but all the internal stuff that goes on. And have a thicker skin. And I think that's important. And I think you build that up over time. But, for some people newer to the profession, particularly if you're new into an SDR role, I mean, that's tough, right? Particularly with the fact that the proliferation, we get contacted through so many different channels all the time. How do you get that cut through? It's a great place because the rejection rate is incredibly high. You get to really kind of refine your patter. And when you do get through, you have to kind of seize that moment importantly. I think this all feeds back to an element of making you a kind of rounder, more robust person who can face rejection, disappointment, and even losing deals. Feel sorry for yourself for a small amount of time, dust yourself off and get going again. I think that's really important, and turn up the next day and just get going. That's what, the best salespeople I've seen definitely have those characteristics, and they don't take it personally. They just know that it's a job.
The best have those characteristics, right? But not everybody does. And I wonder about that because, companies like the ones, that you've worked for hire really talented people but also young, like fresh out of university. And most of these folks never had to be resilient, really. Like they don't think about it. They were smart. They were competitive. They worked hard. They were rewarded for that. And, they weren't punched in the face every day like you are when you're an SDR, hitting the phones. And then all of a sudden you're faced with that rejection and it swallows some people up. So I guess my question on that is, can it be coached? How do you coach someone to dust themselves off, after they get punched and come back the next day and get after it? It's easy to say, but it's tough to do. How do you coach people up on that? If you can.
Well, no, I think some people, if you look at the kind of churn rate sometimes of entry level SDRs, it's fairly high. And there's some people who come in, give it a try and say, it's not for me. And that's fair enough because, it's not necessarily going to get easier. So, at least they gave it a shot. But I think for those that do stick it out, I think it's how you take the rejection and the failures and turn those into positives, because it comes down to, old fashioned adversity. And, what I like to coach people in is sort of saying, if you won all the time, you wouldn't learn anything. And I think, all great business leaders, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, Bezos, name it, will always say that you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. And I think this is such a key example that's critically important because it is true, and that's true of kind of personal life as well as professional life. So I think it's training them at that mindset. And again, is that, maybe you weren't on form that day. I think a lot of people take it personally, but the fact is that it could be down to a whole load of mitigating circumstances. Well, we often say sales is often just down to a bit of luck and timing as well as expertise. So you've got to understand that there are lots of different forces at work. But the one thing that you can control is yourself, how you show up, and then how you react to adversity, failure, and disappointment. So as long as you can control yourself and keep that factor going forward, I think that that's the element, and that's good. And then you create your own luck. That's another kind of, it's a cliche, but the whole point is by showing this kind of adversity, resilience, and moving forward, you increase your surface area of luck, tenfold. And of course, that means that ultimately you will be more successful. So I think that's how you have to think about things, is to, just get on with it and sort of say, okay, maybe that call didn't go so well. Maybe I didn't prep enough. What am I going to do about it next time? And that's the whole thing. So it comes again against a kind of transparent form of leadership, where also you need to understand why people aren't succeeding and help and coach them. But some people don't know what they don't know, particularly at that kind of entry level. And I think that's where management does come in, because it's up to them to see the similarities of perhaps where they were at that point in their career and put an arm around them and just say, okay, fine, have you tried this? Have you thought of this? So it's not kind of beating them with a stick, which is the kind of old school way of sales, which is you have to hit your number. I don't care how you get there. It's doing.
I have those scars. I
think we all do, and we've all rough patches where, our careers may have not worked out as a result of it. But again, that comes back to that point that if anyone's being let go or fired as a result of not hitting their number, what's the lesson they learned from that? Terrible at the time, but I bet that lesson has paid back tenfold in the long term because they learn an awful lot from it and were honest with themselves about what they were responsible for versus, say, the company. And there's always going to be a mix.
I love that. If you won all the time, you wouldn't learn anything. And David Sandler, once said, there's two outcomes with an opportunity, like a deal. Yeah, you win or you get a lesson learned. And I think both of those drive home this point of how do you coach up resilience. And one leader that I worked with, I thought did a great job. I stole this from them, which is you go around the table, go around the horn, each team meeting, like let's say once a week. And this leader would say, hey, everybody, you have to take a turn talking about a time where you had to overcome some adversity, where you failed this week, whether it was small or large. Talk about a time that you failed in some way, shape, or form and what you learned from it. And so what he was doing, the why behind what he did was to reinforce that it's okay to fail and that everyone fails. And, the important thing is that you learn from it.
Yeah, completely agree with that, which is why, throughout, we've often done things at Brandwatch where we would not only, celebrate the wins and then get people to present, the wins that we had and how they won the deal, an analysis so people can be educated, and inspired. But, we would often then have it on the back end of a deal that we lost, and both lessons are as equally important. From that, then you start to kind of, I think, again, build a more robust sales team. And it's not that you're kind of celebrating the losses. It's just that you feel confident enough to actually talk to people about what didn't quite go right so people don't make the same mistakes. I think that's the balance you need to get. And that comes across in a kind of a more transparent style of leadership where, we all want to win and we all want to hit our number. But I think you need to educate people on times when it doesn't go right. And sometimes it's for the strangest of reasons. And sometimes there's an element of personal responsibility and broader elements, or some kind of legal clause that can't be agreed. But you still need to get that information out there because we love winning, but equally losing hurts. But it's as important. Coming back to that point, you learn more from it.
You learn more from it. So resilience. All right, that was a good rundown. Love the talk track on that. So we talked about resourcefulness. We talked about resilience. Charlie, tell me about empowerment.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is particularly in the modern workforce, and I think particularly post-COVID, when we're no longer in the offices, this comes down to an element of allowing people to have their space, their time, and allow them to structure their days, without that kind of old school command and control that probably you and I came up through the ranks, in the early days of sales. So I think empowerment is really about entrusting people to feel confident that they can go out there, have discussions and make decisions without necessarily kind of going up and down the chain of commands. It's a concept of decentralized command, which is very successful, in everything, from, the military through to how surgeons work and even orchestras, is the fact is if you have these kind of small teams who can actually work, you actually create a far more effective way. And the kind of quid pro quo to that is it has to be earned. You can't just come on as a sales leader and say, right, I'm going to empower you to go out and win deals and kind of leave it at that. It comes back to the point is that you need to trust people, and they need to earn that trust off you. But I think it's a much more, better way of actually leading a team. But, as I would often say is, never bring me a problem and 3 solutions. Because the likelihood is that you already know what the answer is. And you either need it validating or you need a kind of sounding board. But that way, the 2 things happen. First of all, you actually solve the problem quicker because actually they often come, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, they have identified the problem and the solution themselves. And then it's a discussion. Okay, that's good. You're on the right tracks. Have you thought of this? But, it's the old adage of, if you give a man a fish rather than teaching him to fish. And what you start to do is create kind of, I think, a sense of kind of ownership and empowerment that they can actually identify problems and solve them on their own. And then it gets to the point, certainly with the best operators I work with, where it's just a heads up, whether it's an email or a Slack to say, FYI, something's gone wrong. They're asking for a crazy liability cap. Don't worry, I've told them this is our maximum, but if I need to come back to you and the chief legal officer, I will. No action needed. That's the kind of thing, right? So you are then educated and aware of what's going on, which if you get asked, by the CRO or the CFO what's going on, but they've kind of solved the problem and you still got that velocity. The worst thing that can happen is that, then they ask and it goes up the chain of command, and then you're just creating latency in the deal, which slows everything down. So that's how you want a slick operating team to do it. But this also does come with experience, so for some of our less experienced members or people who have kind of perhaps younger teams, you can still do this, but the question is, it then comes down to coaching, having deal forums, your frequency of your one-to-ones, where you can start to build this kind of conversation rapport and allow them to actually kind of start to make their own decisions, but realize that you still need to be there in terms of oversight, because of course there's a responsibility, and it comes down that you still need often eyes on that deal. So you're not kind of completely giving empowerment and sort of saying, let me know when the deal's closed. It's that you're allowing them to go away and act on their own with the knowledge that actually you're there as kind of, air support to provide it.
And the air support, and they have to earn it, is the one of the things I took away from what you said. Empowerment is earned, but once it's earned, it helps the entire organization, right? It allows the organization to move faster and accomplish more. And I love what you said about, don't just bring me a problem, and don't just bring me a problem with a solution, bring me a problem with 3 solutions, because ideally, most likely they know what the solution is, but there's good, better, best in terms of what the solutions are. And if you have more than one, like, you can pick the best one for that specific situation. The opposite of empowerment is learned helplessness, which we both see a lot. And that happens a lot with, newer managers, when the rep may bring the problem and say, boss, what do I do? And the boss will, well, this is what you should do, and this is how you should do it. Oh, and by the way, get me in there and I'll do it. Like, let me put my superhero cape on and show you how it's done. And as we know, that doesn't scale, right?
It doesn't at all. And you're absolutely right. And what you'll find is when they come with 3 solutions, and then you can discuss each of them and kind of validate them, you then start to you see constant improvement as they go along. So I think you're absolutely right. The learned helplessness is something, and it comes back to, I'm not sure if you've heard of the drama triangle, which is like, none of you want to be in it. You've got like hero, you've got the villain and the victim, and we can flip between all those 3, and it's kind of below the line behavior. Which we talked about. I'll give a hat tip to Callie Tran, the kind of Cision CEO there, because he did a presentation on it, and I thought it's a really effective way as well to kind of actually show a team, because you can be a victim, sort of saying, well, I didn't know you should do that. You can also be a hero, which is like, as you sort of said, like the manager will come in and say, like, don't worry, I'll sort it out for you. Or you can be a villain going like, why didn't you tell me that? And you can kind of flip between these 3 different behaviors on the drama triangle, but it creates a really kind of, there's lack of empowerment, but also it creates a slightly toxic work atmosphere. And you want to remove yourself from that drama triangle to bring you kind of above the line of behaviors like, empowerment, proactivity, resilience, resourcefulness, and positivity. And that's where people feel, that I'm not, if I go to Charlie, he's just going to shout at me. You don't want any of that. You want people to feel that they can bring you a problem, because you're not this kind of, command and control monster who's kind of demanding stuff. So I think that's it. And that's what the modern workplace is. We are there. I often happen to just have more experience than other people, which is why I'm in a more senior position. And I have most of the answers, but not all of them. And I think if you create an element of trust, transparency, then I think you can actually start to get the best out of salespeople, and they feel valued. And I think that helps other things like stickiness and people not leaving jobs. There's a whole knock-on effect here of being in a place where they feel that they're valued, trusted, and are able just to get on with their jobs. And that's what we want.
And you talk about that whole thing about being confident and, empowerment. Empowerment breeds confidence. Learned helplessness, sucks confidence away from you. So if someone you say, hey, bring the problem, but bring 3 solutions, and you show them that they know how to problem solve, they have the answer. And oh, by the way, as the leader, we learn from them. Like, wow, I didn't even think of that one. And now all of a sudden there's more arrows in our leadership quiver. And, it's like, wow, you taught me something today. I don't know everything. Like you said, I think that's super powerful. On the flip side, where I often struggled with this, and I'll never forget the situation where, I said on reviewing with the rep an opportunity, I said, have you thought about X? And the rep said, huh, yeah, I kind of thought about that, but I didn't know that I could do it.
Yeah,
And
that's what.
And I was like, and I was flippant. I'm like, well, did someone tell you that you couldn't? And I was like, what? Come on, like shake, think, it's, the Marines, they used to say, hey, Benelli, we don't pay you to think. But in sales, you are paid to think. But I was driving home that night and I'm thinking, you know what? I kind of beat up this poor kid and for not knowing that he could do something, but that's my fault as the leader of the organization. And I realized, like, you have to go and tell people that, hey, you can do stuff. And, I went so far as to say, the only rules are there are no rules. Well, there are 2, no one dies. 3 rules. No one dies. No one gets fired. And, there's nothing that, nothing below the line behavior. Our integrity is super important. Don't ever compromise your integrity or the integrity of the brand. But other than that, have at it. And people were empowered by that. And sometimes people went a little over the line. You had to reel them in. But I would much rather reel someone in than try to light their fire, if that makes sense.
Oh, completely. And I think, rules are there to be flexed. I kind of have that mantra as well, is that, often people sort of say, oh, we have very strict rules on, legal conditions or discounting. But the reality is everyone wants to win the deal, and there is a lot of flex in that. And I think that's another element, is to give people that. And I think you're right. The best salespeople are good at what we call like creative solutions. They can come back. If there's a demand from a customer, it's kind of like, well, we can't do that, but how about that? And the way they can do that is by actually understanding where the flex is internally. It could be on payment terms. It could be through to discounting one piece of technology over the other, or it could be provided added value on top of it. So we're saying, well, rather than giving you a discount, why actually don't we give you, added value through products and services and elements like that? So it's that kind of expansive mindset that I think tends to get deals done. And of course, if you're having these conversations with the customer and they're responding in kind, it also shows that there's kind of health and velocity in the deal. Then the idea is that not only the external negotiation, but the internal negotiation can actually go along, and as long as, everyone is kept in the loop on, then absolutely. But it does come back to your original point, is people don't know what they don't know. And I think that is an important management thing, is to kind of educate them on what you can and can't do in terms of guiding them through the deal. So we can look at these 3 different areas to perhaps get to a point where the customer might be happy. But that doesn't necessarily mean, but empowerment isn't offering them a 70% discount because you thought that was okay. That's not what we want. On the second call, empowerment is actually knowing that actually you can have honest and upfront conversations with the customer, then bring them back internally and say, okay, these are the blockers. What trading chips do we have where we can actually start to negotiate, hand back the trading chips back and forth till we get to a point where the deal actually is looking in the kind of ballpark of where they need to be, and they're happy to proceed to signature. And that's the element. And certainly in enterprise deals, that happens all the time. And as there are 2 parts to an enterprise deal. There's actually getting the economic sponsor to sign off and buy into the technology, the company, the sales team, and the post-sales team. And then you get to the kind of procurement and legal process, which is, I think when I started, it was around kind of 30% of the deal cycle. It now can be anywhere from sort of 50 to 60% of the deal cycle. And that's a different hat you have to put on. So again, you constantly have to educate the salespeople, even when they're experienced, about how you actually take these parts of the deal, put different hats on, keep that velocity and hopefully, get it on that kind of close date that you promised in Salesforce, which can move a
Mm.
bit maybe, but we're not talking like months, because no one's happy with that.
Now, no one's happy with that. Well, this whole conversation about resourcefulness, resilience, and empowerment, it makes me think about a conversation I had a long time ago, and somebody we were sitting around the table talking about what makes the best salespeople, and I made some cliche comment like, "Oh, one of the common traits is that the best think outside the box," and one of my colleagues corrected me. I really learned something from her. She said, "No, no, no. The best don't even know that a box exists." And I thought, that's right. The ones who innately are resourceful, are resilient, and earn that empowerment, like they don't even know that there's a box. They're constantly curious and trying to create and find solutions to get to to hit the target. They're not going to get sidetracked. And yeah, just this whole conversation made me think about that.
Yep.
But Charlie, I'm going to
I think
pivot. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I was going to say it loops back nicely to the first point about the myth of like the belief that people who don't believe there's a box often are perceived as these kind of lone wolves charging, but actually they're not. What they're doing is facilitating broader conversations within the company and bringing it all together and actually driving the deal forward, to my mind.
Makes a ton of sense. You brought something up, and you said you referenced kind of the post-COVID world, and
Yeah.
we are in different times. I mean, this is very, very different. What's going on today in 2024 versus in January of 2020, 2019, and so what are the pros and cons what are your observations of leading and selling in this post-COVID world in terms of what's good? What did we take away from COVID that's positive, and what's not so good?
Yeah, I mean, it was a strange couple of years, wasn't it? But I would say the positives are that, coming back to that point of, empowerment and the ability to kind of structure your own day is that, the working from home element was the biggest change, I think, for most people. And strangely enough, when I was at Brandwatch, we always used Slack and Zoom as the kind of central nervous system of all our communication. And I'd been running kind of international teams for quite a while, even though I had teams in the UK, but they're all over the world. So actually the continuity of that conversation, albeit that the travel was restricted, allowed us to fairly seamlessly move through COVID as if nothing had changed. I think for a lot of people who are used to the kind of, 5 days in the office and being around their team members, the change to Zoom and, what we call the tyranny of Zoom, where suddenly there were 30-minute blocks in your diary, sometimes for 7 or 8 hours, which sadly has continued, in spite of that. I think it's just blocked people's diaries and a conversation, that could have taken 5 minutes by sitting on someone's desk, is now a 30-minute call, which can sometimes shift weeks. So I think that the downside is, one of the downsides is we've kind of lost that ability to quickly problem solve, do a quick 5-minute huddle, go back, and that kind of interactivity in the office. I think the upside of that is actually people, particularly in sales, can structure their days in a more meaningful way. And I think, certainly some of the positives I've seen, not only in companies I worked with, but also speaking to peers and colleagues, is a return to the workforce of people who previously might have struggled a bit. So particularly, people, either, mothers or fathers who'd taken a year out to have a young baby, often couldn't find their way back in, particularly if they'd moved outside of a kind of major city. So that kind of flexibility means that we're kind of building back, a part of the workforce that previously might have been excluded because you have to be in the office. And actually we're getting a huge amount of, experienced talent back into the business. And I think that's a huge positive. But of course the downside is how do you build a culture when it's all remote? And I don't think anyone's solved that problem yet. And presenteeism and productivity are not the same thing, and that's a really important point to make, is you can call everyone back to the office just because they're there. You're not necessarily going to boost productivity. So it comes back to the point of what problem are you trying to solve? And if you're trying to build a culture one of trust and empowerment that we've kind of talked about thus far, forcing people back to the office, isn't the only way to do it. I think it's about quality time with colleagues, getting to know each other, and coming back to that problem of like collective problem solving, celebrating wins, understanding losses. That's what you're looking. So it's about probably having, I would say, more time with your colleagues and your teams in a more meaningful way. And that might be less frequent, but it's got to be impactful. And I think those are the kind of paradigms that need to be played around with.
Yeah, and I think like you mentioned, we're still trying to find that balance between how many days remote, days in the office, days remote, that type of thing. And we talked about this a little in the past, which is people have been doing this for a while. Um, maybe used to working remote. They may like you've worked remotely for a long time.
Yeah.
Well before COVID. And a lot of folks have, and then a lot of maybe more senior people uh, got used to working remote and like it, and they don't need to be in the office to be productive, to be part of the team. But on the flip side, the folks that are new do benefit from being in the office, right? I have a 23-year-old and a 24-year-old. I have two kids that are new to the workforce, and they're struggling a little with that. My son just found what seems to be an ideal opportunity where he's in an office with a bunch of people, and his prior position did not offer that. He would go to the office every day in Austin, Texas, but he was the only one there. This big, huge office, nobody went in. So he found a culture that's better for him. My yeah, and my daughters were pretty much 100% remote, and she's not getting that learning experience. In my view, she's not getting that learning experience like you and I did when we first started, which is tough, right? So that's a balance that we're gonna deal with over the next 5-10 years.
It is, and you're right, and you could have a lot of fun, particularly when you're younger and, you're really, that culture, the social aspects, meeting new friends, all that kind of stuff. Not to say that you have to be young to enjoy that, but I think people are missing out on that. But as well as it's the kind of cross pollination between departments as well,
Yeah.
is, it's easier to get to know someone in product or finance if you're all in the same office, and you can, as you say, problem solve quickly. Nowadays, we used to go and sort of buy the people in finance a cup of coffee so we could bribe them on payment terms. You can't do that anymore. It has to be like a Zoom call, and bribery is less effective over Zoom. So it's all those kind of elements of going down there and just perching on someone's desk. So I do get that, but I mean I don't have all the answers. It's a complex beast, and I think for me it's got to be a compromise. A couple of days in the office, maybe with some kind of high impact meetings with kind of teams, departments seems to be the right mix to me. So I think getting
Yeah.
everyone back full time feels like that genie's out of the bottle. But the problem is there are pros and cons to every element of it. And it's going to be interesting to see how we deal with it over the next few years.
Right. For sure. Charlie, I got a question for you. It just kind of popped in my head. Uh, What's the difference in terms of like building a culture? What are the similarities and differences in, let's say, building a team in the UK versus in the US? Is there anything where you're like, oh, if I was blind, or if I was just listening to this group talk in the US versus this group talk, other than the accents, I would say, oh, that's definitely a US team, and this is definitely a UK team. Is there anything significant like that, or are they all very similar?
Well, it is. I mean, I think I've with a global team, with everything from UK, France, Germany, Spain through to Singapore, and then of course like West Coast and East Coast, you get a huge amount of experience. There are lots of different peoples and personalities, and I think that generally is the difference when you're building a team. And I think you need to be sympathetic to that. Each has, of course, their own kind of cultural way of working. I would say the Americans, that kind of Protestant work ethic, still rings true today. They're incredibly hardworking. They're up early, and I think they, often, always fantastic at their work from what I can experience, as are other teams. And I think in the UK, it's we're probably more American than some of our European counterparts, I would say. But the fact is, the results vary. So I think, particularly when you're scaling a global SaaS company, you do need consistency, because you need consistency of approach, in order to track all the deal metrics that are really critical to make sure you're going to hit your targets. You need to make sure that there is an element of a playbook, but a playbook is just a guardrails. It's a piece of paper with some guardrails about how you go about it. So I think you want to make sure there's consistency there. So actually people are selling the technology and approaching it in a similar way, not a cookie cutter approach way, because you need different people and personalities. But then I think it comes down to understanding different regions, their approach to work, their work ethic, and also how you get the best out of it. The French normally take an hour for lunch, which horrifies, it's all very social. They go and sit together, and I think it's a great thing. They guard that very preciously. I'm not saying all of them do, but, some people in America will just have a kind of sandwich at their desk, and it's those differences. The question is I didn't have a problem with either of them, but it's by understanding those cultural differences and how you look at each market that I think you start to get the best out of teams. So I think it's just really, it is down to people, personality, and regions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now I've often found myself thinking, man, the Brits and the Europeans really have it right. We really need to adopt their mindset and approach to work, but somehow we never really fully get there. But yeah, it's this. What's wrong with an hour for lunch and socializing with your colleagues? I got three kind of more rapid fire questions for you, Charlie, as we close this up. Coach2Scale is the name of the show. We talk about coaching and developing people. We care about developing people, and usually people like yourself who care about leading others and developing others had that behavior modeled for them somewhere along the way. Who is somebody like who's had an impact? Tell us about someone who's had an impact on your career and how you approach your craft today.
Lots of inspirations over the years. I would say kind of more recently, I'd say, Dan Freund's been a big kind of inspiration. I think the way he approached stuff, who we both know, Scott Sorachak recently was good. So, I've had a number of CROs over the years, and actually many of them have been American, but I think the main thing that they brought to it is an element of kind of, I would say, honesty and integrity, which I think is really important. And certainly that's shaped me. You need to have honesty and integrity and transparency. And I think I've absorbed that from other people who've led me over the years. And that's making sure that, you speak to your teams in a very open and transparent way to let them know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what the expectations are. And it doesn't say that, you're always Mr. Nice Guy, but the fact is that, once they know what the kind of the mandate and the mission is, then, and what the expectations are, then there's nothing to hide, and you are what you see is what you get. And I think that's definitely very important, when you're in a position of leadership. People don't want to see someone who's a bit grumpy one day or unpredictable. I think that's it. And it's tough, right? We have difficult lives, and I have, smallish children and all that kind of stuff. But when you turn up, you got to turn up. You got to lead with that kind of authenticity, I think, and make sure that, you're not checking all your devices and that you're giving the people the time and attention they deserve. That's how you get the most out of it. And those are kind of people over the years, I think, that I've absorbed some from that from, including my life in advertising and media before that, where there were some great people who had similar attributes. They were just great leaders.
Those type of qualities transcend different types of industries, right? It's not unique to tech sales or anything like that. So, on the topic of coaching, who's your favorite coach? Like when I ask that question, I'm thinking about someone that a lot of people might know of. It's whether it's a fictional or non-fictional character.
Recently, the guy called Sahil Bloom, who I don't know if you've heard of him. He's kind of he's quite prevalent on LinkedIn, but mainly on Twitter. He's fairly new, quite young, but I think he's really taken an element to work-life balance. I mean, he's still one of these people who gets up at 5:30 in the morning and has an ice bath, which, not really my style, and does a lot of journaling. But I think he's an excellent communicator, and he drills down the kind of essence of, it should be about a work-life balance, but he's right about it. It's hard work, but it's about focusing, structuring your day correctly, having self-belief in yourself, and doing things outside of work. Um, and he, like me, does a lot of kind of exercise and fitness. So you actually become, your life becomes a bit better and more rounded. You don't work, live to work. You work to live, whatever it is. If you get to know. So he's a new one, I think, who I find interesting. Amongst could be one of the more newer kind of coaching influencers. But fictional.
Yeah. I love where you went with that. And I actually am familiar with who he is. I didn't do it intentionally, but he constantly shows up on my Twitter feed. Like they have my algorithm. So his stuff shows up and, I must constantly be liking it because I keep getting more of it and other stuff like that. So that's how I came across Sahil Bloom. So I guess we both share an appreciation for his work. We got to let him know that. All right. Well, listen, Charlie, I got to tell you, we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, we talked about resourcefulness, resilience, empowerment. We talked about bringing 3 solutions to a problem. We lamented over the tyranny of Zoom, but also the opportunities that it creates in this post-COVID world. And we talked about the importance of honesty and integrity and transparency. I really appreciate the conversation we had today. Thank you.
It's been brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. And for everybody else out there, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please engage with us wherever you consume your podcast. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you'd like to see more of. We want to bring content and guests to you that are interesting, who provide actionable ideas for you to help make you do a lot easier, help you make more money, grow professionally, and enjoy doing what you do. So thank you for everyone out there. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachemNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.